Well, oh well. Um, now we go. Okay. So we are talking about inhalants now. So this is the third in that table that we had. There was eight rows. This is the third row, inhalants. And inhalants are drugs that are sniffed or huffed. And they hit you really hard because they deprive the brain of oxygen, which results in brain damage, or it kills brain cells. Uh, we're talking about things like paint thinner, glues, gasoline, laughing gas, aerosol sprays. These are very, very damaging to your health, your internal organs, and also just to your mental like state. They will literally like change your personality, like change the way that you think because you're killing brain cells. So inhalants, there's not a whole lot I'm going to say about inhalants, um, but the one that you guys have probably heard of is whippets. That's laughing gas. It's literally killing brain cells. So that's like what's happening when you consume that. So it's not great. They do use laughing gas, like at the dental office for if you're getting like a root canal or like get cavity filled and you have really sensitive teeth or something. But they're doing it at a very low dose, a low concentration that allows it so that it doesn't um, it doesn't let me move that so that it doesn't like impact your health negatively. All right. So these are the examples, these are the effects, and yeah, those are the notes for inhalants. You guys have any questions or comments, please do. I don't think inhalants usually doesn't spur a ton of conversation, but these are just like, I mean, it's really dumb. The other thing that people do that's kind of like an inhalant, even though it's not a drug, but the dumb thing that especially teenage boys tend to do, uh, is they make each other pass out. You guys ever heard of that? Where like somebody will stand up against the wall and they'll put pressure on the carotid arteries and make the person pass out. That is also cutting off oxygen to the brain and is killing brain cells. Don't do that to each other. That was a thing a few years ago. Is that still a thing? You guys aren't gonna let me know? All right. All right, let's move on.
Larson, Larson, that is not still a thing at all.
That's good. It's really stupid.
That's how a Harriman football kid died when he was really young.
Yeah, that
Him and his brother were doing that.
really, yeah. I mean, it can be very, very dangerous, and it's. I'm glad it's not a thing anymore because some of these like little like TikTok challenges or whatever like seem really like not that big of a deal, but that one was like a big deal. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Yep.
All right, so hallucinogens. This is usually one where students are a little more interested. These are drugs that make you hear or see or perceive things differently. So they affect the mind and cause the appearance of things that are not really there. Now, not all of these hallucinogens always do that. Cannabis is marijuana. We're also going to talk about cannabis as its own class, but cannabis is marijuana. It is considered a hallucinogen because in really, really high doses, it can make people hallucinate. But most people that do cannabis don't hallucinate. These other ones, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, and magic mushrooms, um, These all really do make people hallucinate. Hallucinogens can make people be emotionally like all over the place. These are a lot of people say when they use these drugs, they go on a trip. Okay. And the trip can be good or bad. And a bad trip is supposed to be an awful, awful experience. So, like being in a, like having to live out a bad nightmare. Um, these drugs can cause physiological problems, but they tend not to because these are not drugs that people do every day. Um, these are drugs that people tend to do like once a week at most, if not like less. So, and no one's ever actually died of like LSD overdose. Um, but you can die while you're using them because you like are hallucinating and you do something stupid and crash a car or something like that. But these drugs tend not to kill you like you can't really overdose on them. Um, but you could have a heart attack because it does increase your heart rate and blood pressure. So that could happen. I think that's about all. Anyone have any questions about these drugs? Oh, one last thing. Sorry, I had one last thing to say. Some of these drugs, like LSD and magic mushrooms, and psilocybin, by the way, I believe is or it's mescaline. One of these two is peyote. It's used by Native Americans in like religious ceremonies. Um, or peyote should be here, and it's not. Magic mushrooms and LSD are now being used. People are microdosing them under the supervision of like medical professionals, and they're used to treat really, really severe depression that is untreatable, or things like PTSD. So it's like some of the most severe mental illnesses are being treated with micro doses or really, really small doses of these drugs.
Do like drugs they can be different types, right? So like a drug can be like a hallucinogen and a stimulant, or is
Uh,
that no?
there's overlap, yes. There can definitely be overlap. These tend not to be depressants. There's more overlap with stimulants with these than depressants, but there's a little different than stimulants. Because stimulants don't tend to make you like lose your perception of reality. These can make people like see things, hear things, and experience things that aren't real.
Do you know how like a schizophrenic would react if they took hallucinogens?
Oh, I have no idea, but it would definitely be extremely unpredictable. That would be like um, yeah, that would, it's already unpredictable how people are going to react. Somebody could have had like, a good experience every time, and then all of a sudden they have a bad experience one time. But especially you add in a mental illness like schizophrenia where they're already seeing and hearing things, and that could really exacerbate the problems, I would think, but you never know. Good question. Anyone need more time on this slide? All right, next slide. So the effects are altered sense of perception, a little bit of like we said, there is some crossover with stimulants. And then you can have a bad trip, which I talked about, and you can have delusional or like magical thinking. These are this is magic mushrooms here. This is what they look like. LSD is also called acid. It's like it's just a drop of like a liquid acid that is put on, they say it's impregnated onto these little stamp-like pieces of paper, and then it's absorbed through the mouth. This is just more examples of those LSD stamps. And then this is peyote. This is the one that I was mentioning that is used in Native American religious ceremonies, and it's legal for them. It's not legal for anybody else, but it's legal for them. These are magic mushrooms, which are actually starting to become legal in some states, not just medicinally, but even recreationally. It's not going to ever happen in Utah, most likely, but yeah. Okay, the next drug class, and I was hoping to at least get through this one today, if not one more after this, but we'll see. Cannabinoids. Now this is marijuana. So marijuana is a hallucinogen, but we're going to separate it out and treat it as its own drug class as well, because it acts differently than those other hallucinogens in that it generally does not make people hallucinate. It does tend to cause a sense of euphoria, but it can cause confusion and memory problems. You guys probably have heard marijuana does make people forget things. So it's awful to take it if you're a student and you want to perform well. It can lead to high levels of anxiety. It can also affect your motor skills. It doesn't tend to affect them as much as like alcohol, but it definitely slows down your reaction time. So these are some of the effects here, and then the example is just marijuana. There's only one example. Hashish is what it's called sometimes. Obviously, it's called weed sometimes. It's got lots of names. One thing about marijuana that's kind of interesting that you don't have to write down, but while you're writing this stuff down, is that it was really demonized by the government in the 70s and 80s. And it was actually illegal to study the effects of marijuana. And so nowadays it's starting to become legal medicinally and even sometimes recreationally. But the medicinal like part of it is interesting because it was never studied as a medicine until just recently they made it legal to study it as a medicine. So it's kind of unproven as a medicine, even though it does seem to have some beneficial effects for certain populations. This is what it looks like. Um, as far as like when it's growing, and then this is what it looks like when it's actually consumed or like sold, or this would be flour is what they call it, and this would be smoked, or you could bake it into something. This is the way that how legal it was in 2008, and I just think it's interesting to notice like there's only a few states. This is now. And so this graph shows that this really dark color is where it's completely legal. In this darker green color, it's medical and decriminalized, and there's only a few states that fit into that one. Medical is legal, like this is where Utah stands, and there's a number of states where it's medically legal, and then where it's decriminalized, so like only one or two states where it's decriminalized, you wouldn't be convicted for using it, but you could be convicted for selling it or buying it. And then in the gray states, you can use CBD it says with THC only. I'm not exactly what that means, but it's really not very legal in those states. And then in the orange states, it's completely illegal. It does still remain illegal on a federal level. So you can't like take marijuana from one state to the next. This is how it's.
Even if they're both,
Go ahead.
even if the states you're taking it to both completely allow it.
I don't know about that. That's a good question. I don't know about that. But like if you had to cross the state, like if you're going to Colorado to Nevada and you cross Utah, you could get arrested for it in Utah unless you had a medical card. It does seem to have a number of medical uses. The primary one that it is used for is pain management. It's much less dangerous than opioids. And so a lot of people that have chronic pain will use it to help manage their pain. It's generally smoked or vaped or consumed like eaten. Any questions on marijuana? We will have a discussion and a little reading assignment on kind of like the legalization of marijuana another day. So this is not the last time we'll talk about it. Let's do one more drug class today, and then you guys can have about 10 minutes to work, 10 minutes to work on the reading guide, and then you'll have to do a little bit of reading guide work this afternoon. But all right. Let's do opioids. Now, opioids, this is the next drug class. These are, the drugs that I'm really going to try to scare you away from. None of these drugs are good, but these are, in my opinion, probably the most deadly for sure, and the most harmful. Although it's meth would be up there for sure. And alcohol, alcohol, just because of how many people consume it, causes more problems, but it doesn't cause like percentage-wise as many problems. There's like nobody that can use opioids responsibly. Their physiological effects are they're like downers, so they cause drowsiness, confusion, nausea, feelings of euphoria. So they do make people feel good. And I worked as an opioid drug rehab counselor, and the people said for a while it made them feel almost invincible. But then like before too long, the only reason they're taking it is so they don't get sick. And I'll explain that in a second. It causes respiratory complications because it suppresses your respiratory rate, so it slows down your breathing. People that die of opioids tend to die of suffocation. And it's a good pain reliever. It's a really good pain reliever because it blocks the pain signal and it makes you feel high. So it is a very good pain reliever. Marijuana does not block the pain signal as well, but it's much less addictive. The scary thing about opioids is let's say oxycodone is a pretty pretty strong version of an opioid that's prescribed for pain management. Let's say you were prescribed oxycodone for 10 days. Guess what? In 10 days, you become physically addicted to it. You're going to need to withdraw. They're going to have to write you a prescription that tapers you off, that makes it so you take smaller and smaller doses every day until you can quit, to not have withdrawal symptoms. Opioids can make you physically addicted as faster than any other drugs. Codeine is oftentimes used in like cough syrup. Fentanyl is the one that is killing everybody right now because they're using it in like party drugs that people take, like pills they buy online and stuff like that. Heroin is sometimes laced with fentanyl. It's just way more potent. So it'll, if you take the wrong dose, you will die of opioids if you take the wrong dose. Heroin is the street version that is oftentimes shot up or smoked. Morphine is the medicinal one that's used in hospitals for pain. But all of these drugs are eventually turned into morphine in the body. Opium is like the actual like poppy seed that it comes from. Oxycodone is a pain medicine version that is oftentimes used, and then hydrocodone is like a lower. It has Tylenol in it as well as acetaminophen, and it's kind of a lower. It's not as potent. It's a pain pill version of opioids, but it's not as potent as oxycodone. And then, like I said, oxycodone is probably 10 times more potent than hydrocodone, and fentanyl is like 1,000 times more potent than oxycodone. So you can tell if it's 1,000 times more potent, you have to take 1,000 times less to not overdose with fentanyl, and that's why it killed so many people. A lot of people that become addicted to opioids, and then we're going to have to pause the opioid stuff today because I'm going to stop lecturing here. In fact, I'm going to stop here. We'll have to come back and finish this part next time. But a lot of people that become addicted to opioids start off with legitimate prescriptions for pain management. And it's generally oxycodone, although sometimes it's hydrocodone. Vicodin would be another one that people might take. And it they become physically addicted to it, and then they end up switching to heroin because it's so much cheaper and they can't afford the pain pills anymore. We'll talk a little bit more about the opioid epidemic, which took place in over the last 20 years. But basically, pain pills with opioid-derived pain pills were prescribed really irresponsibly, and a lot of people became addicted. And it's been a huge problem, and it's still a problem. Anyone have any questions or comments about opioids before we end the lecture today? I'll talk about this next time, but the last thing I just want to say is if you ever are with somebody that's overdosed on opioids, and chances are it'll happen to at least a portion of you guys, there is a drug called Narcan that you can get from a pharmacy that will reverse opioid overdose. Like it will bring somebody back to life. Like I'll show you a video if I can find it, where this lady like looks like she's dead. Like she's not moving, she's blue and everything. And they administer Narcan, and she literally like stands up and like jumps out of the ambulance, like fully alert. Like it's amazing how Narcan works, and it is available in pharmacies. So if you're ever with somebody and you think they might have overdosed on opioids, go to a pharmacy and get Narcan and then take them to the ER. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll stay on here for another 10 minutes or so. But what you need to do now is the vocab of the reading guide and the first 3 questions. Okay. You probably won't have enough time before your 4th period class to finish, but you can do like 20 minutes after, this afternoon. That shouldn't be asking too much.
Do you want us to turn that in today?
You're going to turn in, yeah, you don't have to turn in the whole thing, although if you want to turn in the whole thing, you can. I'm not going to grade the whole thing. I'm only grading the vocab and those first 3 questions. All right, thanks, guys. If you don't want to stay on, you don't have to at this point. I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'll stay on if anyone has any questions or comments for me.